Welcome to today's session of the Travelers Cyber Academy, Understanding Cyber Risk in the Cloud. According to a recent report, approximately 96% of today's businesses are using a cloud computing service in one form or another. It is important for businesses to understand the benefits of migrating to the cloud, as well as the potential risks involved and the steps that they can take to mitigate those risks. We will start by reviewing different types of cloud services, which are often grouped into three categories: software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Taken as a whole, these services allow businesses to move software applications and other information technology assets from the business premise, sometimes referred to as on-prem, to a third-party service provider. While there are benefits to doing so, of course, there are also risks. We will hear about those risks from Ankur Sheth of the Ankara Consulting Group, formerly Navigant, and Keith Novak of Kroll, who will also describe best practices for how businesses can help protect against those risks. In some ways, cloud computing is simply the next evolutionary step in how businesses rely on third-party service providers to meet their IT needs. Many businesses, for example, have long relied on web hosting companies to host internet websites, or on third-party data centers to provide and manage servers, backup facilities, and other IT infrastructure. What's new about the cloud is the breadth and variety of services that are available, and the incredible ease with which businesses can access them. When it comes to software as a service, or SaaS, there is almost no category of traditional, on-premises business software that does not have a cloud-based version. From email, word processing, and spreadsheets to HR, CRM, and ERM, businesses can choose from ready-to-use cloud-based solutions that do not require installation and maintenance like traditional on-prem software tools. For businesses that are developing software applications, whether customer-facing or strictly for internal use, Platform as a Service offerings, or PaaS, provide an easy way to jumpstart the development process. These services provide ready access to the essential building blocks that businesses need to build new applications, whether those applications rely on databases and other familiar technologies, or on more novel technologies such as machine learning. Finally, Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS, provides a way for businesses to establish or expand computing resources, on the fly and on demand. For example, a business that needs to improve its backup and disaster recovery capabilities could turn to an infrastructure as a service provider for a cloud-based solution that is quick and effective, one that does not require a large initial investment in backup software and hardware storage capacity. Obviously, there are many advantages to moving to the cloud. Whether a business is looking for a ready-made SaaS solution, or to develop a custom app on a PaaS platform, or to move an existing system to an IaaS provider, the cloud can offer the right level of service and thereby allow for faster implementation. Cloud-based services are also generally less expensive than their on-prem counterparts, both in terms of upfront costs and maintenance. They also provide for greater scalability, since it is usually easy for businesses to add additional computing power and resources as needed on demand. Finally, the flexibility and ease of using cloud-based services can contribute both to a business's increased innovation and higher productivity. It is not surprising, therefore, that 96% of all businesses report using one or more cloud services. In fact, businesses report using nearly 5 cloud services on average, which includes a combination of both public and private clouds. In public clouds, the computing resources used to provide the cloud services are shared, although of course each business's data and activities are kept separate and private, even on a public cloud. When a business uses a private cloud, it is allocated dedicated computing resources by the cloud service provider, creating an extra level of security. Security of data in the cloud is understandably a concern to many businesses, and choosing appropriately between public and private cloud services is one way that businesses can address that concern.
I think every company nowadays has some component in the cloud. I can't personally think of a major business function out there that does not have a variant of a cloud provider out there. Obviously, there's lots of on-premise solutions. That's what's been the traditional way. I'll give you a couple examples. I think Workday for HR is probably the big one right now, right? A lot of people use SAP, Oracle, some of the traditional solutions, and many are using Workday now, which is fully a SaaS model to manage all of their HR functions. And that could include more than just managing of the employees and full-time people, but also includes payroll and other HR components. We talked about Salesforce for CRM and client management. So that's a big one out there that we've seen as well. Another one that we see on the IT side of it, which may make more sense for some people, is ServiceNow. So ServiceNow is an IT service management tool. It's probably the biggest one from a cloud perspective right now. So all the major functions I think I can think of off the top of my head have some cloud variant. And like I said, more and more businesses are adopting these based on kind of what their individual and specific recommendations and needs are. Companies are really thinking about what services do we want to put in the cloud versus which ones do we still want to store internally and manage ourselves, because that is ultimately our responsibility. That's our data. We own it, and we are responsible if we lose it. And that could have a lot of effects in terms of breach if you are a company, obviously financial, but also reputational. So that's the big thing. And I think the services that people are putting in the cloud are where they're really trying to identify what makes the most sense for them. Something like Salesforce, which is an internal tool, most people are moving to because there's really nothing in there that's going to be too confidential and too cumbersome to maintain. And it's a great tool, obviously, so that's not as big of a concern. When you're putting health records in the cloud, that's a different issue because that has a lot of information that you may not want to be out there and or your customers may not be comfortable with as well.
The cloud is very unforgiving. When you are in a public cloud environment and your systems are potentially internet accessible, some companies, when determining whether they're going to use public cloud or private cloud, are looking at it from the perspective of risk. It's probably one of the best ways to look at cloud adoption. A particular company that I've worked with is dealing with a lot of healthcare information, and the risk associated with a data breach is very, very high for them. So some of the determination that's made there is moving to the private cloud because health information would be a little more tightly secured in a private environment where only they have access to it. So a little bit better controls around the private cloud as opposed to the public cloud where you're using a shared storage model and everything would be internet accessible. When I say shared storage in a public cloud, essentially what that means is there's a pool of storage that is shared amongst everyone. So it may be one server with however much space that's divvied up between all of us. So all of our data resides on that one particular server. We don't all have access to each other's data. There are restrictions. I can only see my data that I'm allowed to see. However, it is all shared on that one particular server. The issue with shared storage really becomes this. It's not necessarily that it's an issue with us both sharing the storage. The problem is typically around a regulatory issue. So if I'm storing sensitive data or regulated data, PHI for instance, in a shared environment, what will happen is the service provider in that environment may back that data up, may store it outside of that particular instance. They may move it to backup tape, they may move it off-site, they may replicate that data overseas. This introduces challenges from a regulatory perspective. Think about something like the EU GDPR regulation, where I need to know where that data is being stored, and it needs to be maintained within whatever those borders are. I don't necessarily know how that shared storage is provisioned and replicated. So I have very little context into how that data moves because they're essentially providing it as a one for all. So this is the storage you all get to use, but you don't get much say in where that data moves to or how it's stored or even access to it from a back-end perspective.
For many small to medium-sized businesses, cloud-based services may be more secure than an on-premises counterpart. For example, consider a cloud-based accounting system. Ensuring the security of that system will probably be a very high priority for the service provider. whereas most businesses cannot focus on the security of just one system, no matter how critical. Accordingly, the service provider will be able to allocate more resources and will have greater available expertise to ensure that the system is properly maintained and protected from vulnerabilities. Also, cloud-based service providers often must meet the needs of a wide range of potential customers, including customers with stringent security and auditing requirements. By complying with the requirements of its strictest customers, cloud service providers are often able to provide better security for all of their customers. Of course, moving to the cloud is not a panacea, and poor security practices will create problems for businesses whether on-prem or in the cloud. According to a report by the Cloud Security Alliance, the number one security issue in the cloud is familiar: the risk of a data breach. In most cases, these data breaches are not caused by a security failure on the part of the cloud service provider, but by misconfiguration or other errors when businesses move data to the cloud. For example, in a review of data storage buckets at one service provider, it was found that unrestricted access to the data was permitted 7% of the time, and data was not encrypted 35% of the time. The Cloud Security Alliance also found that weak identity and access management was a problem in the cloud, just as it is on premises. In the cloud, compromised credentials can allow criminals to steal money and data, as well as computing power, by putting additional servers online that are charged to the victim and used to run software for mining cryptocurrency. This is a new kind of crime known as cryptojacking. Finally, cloud services are often accessed through custom APIs, or application programming interfaces. When those APIs are poorly designed, for example, by allowing passwords to be sent without encryption, the result will be a system with compromised security. Let's take a look now at a significant new threat that businesses should be aware of when migrating to the cloud. We'll start with Company A, a company that still relies on traditional on-prem servers for its email and HR and payroll systems. For a hacker to get access to those systems, the hacker must get access to Company A's network, which will hopefully be protected by firewalls, antivirus, and other similar security controls. Company B, however, has migrated its email and HR systems to the cloud. This reduces the burden on Company B's IT department, which no longer has responsibility for patching and maintaining those systems. It is also a convenience for Company B's employees, who can read and respond to emails from anywhere. Unfortunately, that also means that attackers can try to access those systems from anywhere, using guessed or stolen passwords. In fact, there are enormous archives of stolen usernames and passwords available on the internet, and hackers can run those archives against a cloud service until they find one that works. This new form of attack is known as credential stuffing. Also, as businesses add more cloud services, many employees will use the same password on different systems. This can cause a business to suffer significant financial losses when an employee's email password is compromised, perhaps through phishing, and the same compromised password is then used, for example, to access the HR system and to redirect the employee's paycheck. Even more damage could be caused if the attacker is able to get access to a customer database, medical records, or even an accounts payable system. Fortunately, these types of attacks can largely be thwarted by turning on multi-factor authentication, a security control that is available with many cloud services. Multi-factor authentication, which is sometimes referred to as two-factor authentication, means using two or more means of authentication instead of relying simply on a password. A password is something you know. Other forms of authentication include something you have, such as a hardware token or a mobile device that can be used to receive a text message, and something you are, such as a fingerprint or retina scanner.
Cloud will expose every vulnerability in your information security program. And by that I mean, if you have a weakness in technical controls, something such as multi-factor authentication. We commonly use multi-factor authentication today for banking. Essentially, you get a token on a phone. So you put in your username and password, you get a token on a phone. That's actually a very good control. Many companies still have not adopted that today. So what's happening now is they haven't adopted that for their on-premise systems, and now they begin adopting cloud. Well, they don't think to enable that service in the cloud because they're not currently using it in-house. That's a weakness, a vulnerability. Not doing that in the cloud opens yourself up to a lot of risk. So every little weakness, technical controls, process is another great one. So one of the most critical and basic functions of IT is essentially to provision a user account, add a new user to give them access to a service. The very opposite of that is to deprovision a user and take away that access. So think about this. On-premise, I can simply remove their user account and they no longer have access. It's not publicly accessible. It's only private within my private network. The problem with cloud is if I don't deprovision that user for, say, email that happens to be residing in the cloud, well, guess what? They still have access to all of that data that they had in the cloud. Now, that could be a file share, that could be email, that could be collaboration tools. And so all of those little weaknesses to your program ultimately are very exposed once you start to adopt the cloud. You need to have a good strategy in place, good technical controls, a very mature information security program before you start to move into cloud services.
At Ancora, we have a large incident response team, and we deal with around 100 breaches a month, so 1,200 in a year as our current pace. And I think we see kind of three big areas that come out of these incidents once we do the analysis and investigation. So one, which I think most people are very knowledgeable about, is data exfiltration. Pulling out confidential data, whether that's credit card information, healthcare information, social security numbers, etc. The second one I would think is payment diversion. So payment diversion can mean two things. It could be, or can mean multiple things, but the two big ones we see is invoice diversion. So when you are paying a vendor or paying a supplier, they will divert that invoice so that they get paid and change a banking account information on there, so that the hacker or whatever the organization is will then take that money and then leave with that. The other side of it is employee payroll diversion. So someone can log into your cloud-based payroll system and change the direct deposit number of the bank. So I think the third one we've seen is really utilization of compute resources. So as the hacker gets into your environment in the cloud, they can plant software on there to do cryptocurrency data mining, right? And really, that may not be as big a deal for servers that are up and running, that are already utilizing some power to do specific activities, but really in the cloud, they have the ability to spin up new servers. So if we think about infrastructure as a service, as we talked about earlier, they can spin up new infrastructure to do just mining. And that in the end is a true bottom line cost to your organization, whatever that may be. And they can spin up hundreds and thousands without, potentially not that many without you noticing, but they will spin up additional ones, and that over time will have a bottom line effect on your organization.
One of the problems we're seeing when we do a risk assessment is shadow IT. Essentially what we're finding is departments who are adopting the cloud on their own with very little direction from the organization. File sharing is a great example. They may sign up for a file sharing service and start to share or store confidential information, whether it be intellectual property, whether it be regulated information. So protected health information is a great example. They begin to store and share that information using cloud-based file share services. The organization has no idea. They haven't implemented technical controls because essentially the department is trying to go on about their business, but haven't really put a strategy behind that particular service.
Businesses that are moving to the cloud need to understand that security is a shared responsibility. It is sometimes said that cloud service providers are responsible for the security of the cloud, while cloud customers are responsible for security in the cloud. What this means exactly will depend on the type of cloud service involved. For example, when a business is using cloud-based servers to run applications in its own environment, in other words, using infrastructure as a service, the business will probably be responsible for maintaining the applications and backing up its own data. On the other hand, businesses using applications under the software as a service model will probably expect those responsibilities to be handled primarily by the service provider. Either way, It is critically important for businesses to understand what responsibilities they have when it comes to the security of cloud services, as well as the built-in security tools and features that may be available to them, such as encryption, data loss prevention, and multi-factor authentication. In addition, businesses that are using multiple clouds or are operating a hybrid environment, which some users are on-prem and others are in the cloud, may want to consider using a Cloud Access Security Broker, or CASB. A CASB can be used to support single sign-on capabilities across multiple cloud or on-prem systems, while enforcing strong access controls, even for services that do not have them built in. CASB can also provide greater visibility into how cloud services are being used, particularly when it comes to remote users who would otherwise be outside the purview of on-prem security systems. Finally, a CASB can support additional security controls, such as encryption or data loss prevention, if those controls are not available for a given cloud service. In general, businesses that are moving to the cloud should start by developing a cloud strategy. This can help avoid the problem of shadow IT, in which different departments start using cloud services on an ad hoc basis without the knowledge or involvement of the business's IT department. Businesses also need to extend their awareness and insight beyond third-party vendor management to fourth-party risk and beyond. If a third-party vendor is storing or processing the business's sensitive data using a cloud service, that is a fourth-party risk that the business should be aware of. As discussed earlier, businesses also need to understand their security responsibilities in the cloud and to properly configure cloud services and security features such as access controls, encryption, and logging. Finally, as with any other part of their IT infrastructure, businesses should regularly test and audit their cloud services and cloud configurations to avoid any unexpected surprises. Fortunately, for businesses that have cyber insurance, many kinds of cloud-based losses may already be covered. Cyber insurance will often cover the costs of investigation and remediation after a data breach, for example, and for data breach notification, whether the data is lost from an on-prem system or a cloud-based service. Cyber insurance is also available for lost income that a business may experience if a service provider, such as a cloud provider, is compromised. This is sometimes known as contingent business interruption coverage. Finally, insurance coverage for legal defense and liability after a data breach, as well as regulatory defense, generally does not depend on whether the breach occurred on-prem or in the cloud.
Security in the cloud is a shared responsibility between the service provider as well as the organization that is buying the services. So a good analogy of this is building a new house. You're going to hire a contractor to build a house, and as part of that, you're going to have them install a state-of-the-art security system, locks on doors, locks on windows, and all the general security measures that are part of a house. But what happens is, once you move in, if you don't actually utilize those controls, then that responsibility falls to you. You need to lock your doors. You need to put a alarm code that's not the base code of 000 and put in something more comprehensive. It's your job to actually utilize the controls that are available to make sure that your house is actually secure when you're gone. And it's the same thing with software. You have to utilize the controls that a service provider gives you. If you don't utilize those controls, it's just as much on your head as it is on them.
One of the fundamental things that we do here at Kroll when we're doing a risk assessment, and we've identified a cloud adoption by an organization, is we start to do an application inventory and really understand what have they already adopted, and ensuring that the organization is looking at it from a compliance perspective and that the technical controls are in place. And if they aren't, identifying those vulnerabilities and getting them to remediate whatever that may be.
So some companies are not even aware that you can add on additional services into services that the provider already gives you. And I'll give you an example here. Is maybe something around an idea of data loss prevention, so DLP. So data loss prevention's concept is stopping data from leaving the network that is not supposed to leave the network. And that's used and that's built off policies and algorithms that you build into a tool to recognize patterns. So an example is you may not allow employees to send out Excel files, as a very basic example. So it's looking for a .xls extension, and it will block anything that does that. Some security providers that are out there that do DLP may not have as sophisticated controls available. They may only be able to operate at the very basic level of file extensions and may not be able to do advanced algorithms and advanced monitoring data that's leaving the network. So that's an example where a provider will have a capability in that functional realm, but it may not be adequate enough for what you are trying to do as an organization.
The problem is when you start to adopt the cloud, there is really a skill set. It's learning for those IT team members. And one gap that we consistently see from a lot of organizations is they just don't give their IT teams the training that they need. And cloud is a very specialized form of storage. One misconfiguration and you're opening yourself up to a breach. So making sure that your IT staff understand what they're getting into is really, really important. Something like an AWS, Amazon Web Services, where you're using infrastructure as a service. There are things called virtual private systems. There are firewalls. All of the on-premise controls are now available in AWS, but they call them something completely different. And you really need to understand not only the terminology, but the capabilities. So ensuring that those people who you are trusting to do those configurations know what they're doing is of utmost importance.
Another thing to consider when migrating to the cloud is potentially using a cloud access security broker, or commonly referred to as a CASB. A CASB is essentially another appliance that you can use that sits between your company's network and the cloud provider. And essentially what its job is to enforce policies and check transmission of data that leaves your network that's going to your cloud providers. And this can be set up for multiple cloud providers, not just one.
Companies need to realize that depending on the service that you are adopting, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, your backup and disaster recovery needs are not necessarily just met because you've adopted the cloud. They're very nuanced. Software as a service, for instance, they guarantee that the data you're storing there will stay there and it will be replicated and always available to you. They won't necessarily have a snapshot of that data from a month ago or a year ago. If you delete it, it's essentially gone. If you talk about platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, it's really up to you to determine what level of backups do you need. So you may need the capability to go back 3 months. So that's not natively offered. That's something that you need to make sure that you have a contractual relationship with for that data.
From an incident response perspective, having a cloud provider doesn't change your overall plan. The indication is that every organization should have an incident response plan, an incident response notification plan, and should have an idea of how to handle the organization and all the underlying components when an incident happens. So when you are doing an incident response, you're going to be working with hopefully your cyber risk insurance provider. They will help bring in the right people to actually resolve the incident. And that could be a variety of people, including not just lawyers, but also the right teams to pull the right information you may need from both your on-premise products as well as your cloud products.
Every cloud service has a little bit different logging, has a little bit different controls. So when you look for a forensics firm who can do those cloud forensics, they really need to understand what the capabilities are. Office 365 is a great example. There are a lot of logs, but you really need to understand. You can't just download, thousands of logs and automatically pick out, hey, here's what happened. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of knowledge. In many cases, in our case, we've created customized tools where essentially those logs will come down in a bulk capacity, and we've actually created a tool where we can really understand at a very granular level, what did an attacker do? What searches did they create? Did they create an out-of-office rule? And that really helps when you're looking to do response. So it is absolutely essential that you work with a firm who understands what capabilities those cloud services provide.
Moving to the cloud, can offer significant advantages to businesses, including easy access to the latest technologies with low upfront costs. However, businesses should understand the risks involved and be prepared to mitigate those risks, including by defining a coherent cloud strategy, prioritizing security in the cloud, and monitoring cloud usage and activity. Finally, businesses should consider obtaining insurance to protect against cyber risk, both on-prem and in the cloud. Thank you very much for your time today. We hope you enjoyed this session of the Travelers Cyber Academy on Understanding Cyber Risk in the Cloud. If you have any further questions, please contact us at trvcyber@ems.travelers.com. Or for a replay of this session to share with your colleagues and find additional resources on this topic, please visit travelers.com/cyberadvantage.